We find in Medrash Rabbah about the name of Moshe Rabbeinu, the name Moshe, the name Moses. Vatikro Shemo Moshe. She called him Moshe. And the Medrash says, Mikan atolomed schoron shel gam lechasodim. From here you can see the reward for those who do kindness. Despite the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu had many different names, he was called Tovia, he was called Tuv, he was called Yekusiel, he was called Avigdor, many different names. Lo nikbelo shem b'chol Torah elo k'Moshe korashu pasya baspara. He is in the Torah never called anything else than Moshe, the name that Pharaoh's daughter gave to him. Va'af HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo karohu b'shem acher. Also, HaKadosh Baruch Hu never spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu and called him by any other name. Actually, the name by which he is called at the burning bush, at the sneh, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Moshe, Moshe. Where does this name Moshe come from? And what does it mean? We read in this week's Sedra, Vayikdal ayelet vateviehu levas parao, Vayi lo levein, vatikro shemo Moshe, vatalma ki min hamayim mishisihu. When Moshe Rabbeinu grew up, he was 2 years old, and he was weaned, and his mother, who had been hired by Pharaoh's daughter as a wet nurse, brought him to his legal owner, the daughter of Pharaoh. She had the baby only on loan. And then Moshe Rabbeinu was adopted formally by Pharaoh's daughter. Vatikro shemo Moshe, and she called him Moshe. And she said, Ki min hamayim mishisihu, for I have drawn him out of the water. Wherever you open a Chumash with an English translation, or in any other language, or any Bible, any Christian Bible, you will always see this translated as, for I have drawn him out of the water. And our sages comment that it's actually a prophetic name, because he is not called Moshui, drawn out, or Nimshah, but he's called Moshe, a drawer out, alluding to the later episode of Kriyas Yamsuf, when Moshe Rabbeinu sort of drew the Bnei Yisrael out of the water of Kriyas Yamsuf and prepared for them. Nice. Actually, HaKadosh Baruch Hu prepared, but Moshe Rabbeinu was their leader, and he stretched out his staff over the sea, and the sea split, and they went through the sea on dry land. And that is min hamayim mishisihu, is a refers prophetically to Moshe Rabbeinu as the rescuer of the Jewish people, not as the one who was rescued from the water from which the daughter of Pharaoh rescued him. There is a problem here. Did the daughter of Pharaoh know Hebrew, that she could give Moshe such a meaningful name? So this problem is being addressed by many of our commentators. And I want to summarize what Abravanel, the great Don Yitzhak Abravanel, the Spanish sage from the time of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, what he says about this. Surely she did not speak Hebrew, she spoke Egyptian. And it's not plausible that she would have said, I'm going to inquire, I want to call him the one whom I drew from the water. How do you say that in Hebrew? I'll ask one of the Hebrew slaves to please translate this from Egyptian into their language. This is not conceivable. So therefore, logic dictates that the name that she would have given to this baby would have been an Egyptian name that means drawn from the water. And that then the Torah takes this Egyptian name, translates it into Hebrew, and gives the reason. And Ibn Ezra, quoted by Abravanel, and says that actually the Egyptian name of Moshe Rabbeinu was not Moshe, but Monios. He says he found this in some Arabic books that were translated from ancient Egyptian, but the name Monios was not translated. It was copied over in the original Egyptian language, Monios. It means drawn from the water. This is what Ibn Ezra reports, and Abravanel is not happy with this Because he says, if that is so, what stops us from saying Cain, Hevel, Noach, Peleg, even Odom, Chava, all people who lived well before the Jewish nation existed, would have had names in other languages they spoke at the time, I don't know, Sumerian or whatever it may be. And that would mean that the Hebrew language does not date from the moment of creation. It takes away all the pedigree of the Hebrew tongue, of the holy language, that our sages rely on to say the Torah was actually the instrument of creation. With the words of the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. As we say in our prayers, Baruch she'omar v'hoyo ha'olam. Blessed is he who spoke and the world became. He brings another proof that this theory of Ibn Ezra doesn't make any sense. And it is the fact that when an Egyptian name is mentioned in the Torah, that has a meaning that we need to know, or that we would like to know, the Torah doesn't translate it. Joseph got a name from Pharaoh. Pharaoh called him Tzafnas Poneach. Our sages say that it means Megale Amukaus, somebody who reveals hidden secrets, Tzafnas Poneach. And if that is what it means, why does the Torah not translate that name into Hebrew and say that Pharaoh called him revealer of dreams or revealer of secrets, and leave it at that? So the theory that Moshe should be a translation from an Egyptian name into Hebrew is not conceivable, it's not logical, it's not a feasible explanation. Another proof is from Onkelos. When Onkelos translates this pasuk, Vayikra Yelet, Vataviehu Vasparo Vayilo Leven Vatikro Shema Moshe Vatoma Kimina Mai Meshisiu, then Onkelos translates it into Aramaic, and he translates Kimina Mai Meshisiu in good Aramaic, but Moshe he leaves untranslated. Right? So if the practice of translators is that when a name that has a specific meaning should be translated into another language, that you should translate both the explanation of the name and the name itself to comport with the pun or with the derivation in the receiving language, that is not the way translators work. You can look at any translator, they will translate proper nouns, never, ever. They transliterate them. Abravanel says, in the process of transliteration, it may change a little bit. For example, Shim'on in Hebrew, in Greek would become Simeon because they don't have an ayin sound. Likewise, Azza becomes in English Gaza because the Gaza cannot be pronounced in English. From that we have Sodom and Gomorrah. It is of course Sodom and Amorah. Amorah is with an ayin, it's with a hard ayin, and that is then in Greek it becomes a gamma, and in English it becomes a G. Transliterations change names, but they never change the actual meaning of the name. The meaning of the name can only be understood in the original language. Comes along Abravanel and says, you know what the origin of this whole confusion is? It is the connection that you make between the name Moshe and the explanation Kimina Mai Meshisihu. If you say she called his name Moshe because she said, I have drawn him out of the water, you have a problem, because it can only be Baspara who says that. Says Abravanel, you know what it is? The whole thing speaks about Yocheved. It is Yocheved who called him Moshe, and it's Yocheved who said Kimina Mai Meshisihu, and you mistranslate Meshisihu as I have drawn him out of the water, because what you hear is Moshisi Osau. Moshisi I have drawn, Osau him out of the water. The two glued together, Meshisihu. But Moshisi is written at the end. Mem Shin Yud Tav Yud. Meshisihu, as we find it in this pasuk, is not written with a Yud after the Tav. It's written Mem Shin Yud Tov Hei Vov. And the E sound in Meshisihu is merely a chirek. It's merely a dot under the Tov. Therefore, says Abravanel, it does not mean I have drawn him out of the water. It means you have drawn him out of the water. Moshis also. Moshis is good Hebrew, second person feminine singular, and Moshisi is the first person singular. So now this is Abravanel's solution. Abravanel says it was not Bas Paroi who called him Moshe, it was Yochebed. Another part of the jigsaw. We find in the Arachayim, we find Vatikro Shemo Vatomer. She gave a name and she said, he says, Hine Timtze Shinui Bekriyas Shem Yitzchak Yaakov and Shvatim. Because when names were given to people in the time of the Ovas, it was always Lekulum Yaktim Tam Hashem Va'achakach Hashem. You first hear the reason and then the name. For example, So Imenu says, Kol Hashomer Yitzchak Li. Everybody who hears the fact that I, as an old woman, have given birth will laugh because of me. Vatikro Shemo Yitzchak. Therefore she called his name Yitzchak. When it comes to Yaakov, Yitzchak sees that Yaakov grabs the heel of Esav. V'yoda chezes ba'akev Esav. And then, Vayikro Shemo Yaakov. Therefore he called him Yaakov. When the Shvatim Uven, Ki ro Hashem es oni, Hashem has seen my affliction. Vatikro Shemo Reuven. She called him Reuven. Same with Shimon. Ki shoma. Therefore, Vatikro Shemo Shimon. So this is the standard order. First the reason, then the name. Here, it's the other way around. It is first the name and then the reason. Now, occasionally you find that the reason is after the name giving, but never with the term Vatomer, and she said. It always said Ki Amra, for she had said. So still logically, the reason comes first and the name comes afterwards. So how does that fit in our story? Now we're stuck. We have even another problem. We've quoted the Medrash Rabbah, where the Medrash Rabbah says Abravanel cannot be right because HaKadosh Baruch Hu honored Moshe Rabbeinu and rewarded Bas Paroi for the chesed that she did, that she took care of this little baby. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu will always be called by the name that she gave him. Now Abravanel says she didn't give the name, it was Yochebed who gave the name. So Abravanel cannot be correct. B'mechilas k'vod Torah, he cannot be correct. The Netziv. This is the last bit of the puzzle, and then we can put it all to bed. The Netziv says the following. Vatikro Shemo Moshe, and she called his name Moshe, Ro'isi b'shem horav Reb Shmuel b'medinas Behem. I saw in the name from a gentleman called Rav Shmuel, who lived in Bohemia. The Beloshen Mitzri Tevazu, Moshe, that in the Egyptian language, this name Moshe, Ketsuroso, like it is Mem Shin He, Mashmo'o Yelet. It doesn't mean water drawn or anything, it means child. And in fact, if you think of the names of Egyptian pharaohs, Ahmose and Tutmose and Rahmose, Ramesses, Rahmose, it means the child of Tot and the child of Ra and the child of this. Mose is good Egyptian for child. Says Netziv, V'yelet HaMelech nikra bebedina HaYelet. A prince is called the child. You still find that in, for example, the Spanish monarchy, the Spanish princes and princesses are called infante, child. They can be grown up, they can be middle-aged, they're still called infante. They're the child of state. Basher hu velad yulot la Medina. He is a child born unto the state. Says Netziv, v'hu bionochan. This is the correct explanation. Pirsho hatam shehi yelet shelo. Now the name giving is entirely conventional. Vayihi lo levein, and he became her son. Vatikro shemo Moshe, and she called him Moshe, because that is what it means. Vayihi lo levein, she became his child. He now is the Yelet Hamedino, the child of state. How then do we interpret Vatomer kimina mai meshisihu? There we can use the idea of the Abravanel that meshisihu does not mean I have drawn him out of the water, but it means you have drawn out of the water. Yocheved, hearing that the daughter of Paro called the child Moshe, she heard something else. She heard there's a Ruach HaKodesh even in this Egyptian princess giving a name to my child. He is called Moshe for a different reason than she thinks. And this is what we find in the Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara in Chulin, Kuf Lamed Tes on the base, 139, the second folio, asks the question, Moshe min HaTorah minayim, where do we find Moshe in the Torah? The answer is B'shagam hu bosar. At the end of Parshas Bereshis, it says B'shagam hu bosar, man will live only for 120 years, since he is also flesh, whatever, B'shagam. You add up the letters of B'shagam, you get the gematria of Moshe. Gemara in Chulin actually discusses three other names. Homon min HaTorah minayim. Where do we find Homon of the Purim story, where we find him mentioned in the Torah? And Gemara answers, Hamin ha'etz, have you then eaten from the tree in the Garden of Eden? The next question that's being asked is, Esther min HaTorah minayim. Where do you find the name Esther in the Torah? Answers the Gemara, Onachi haster astir. I will surely hide my face in the Torah. And then finally, Mordechai min HaTorah minayim. Where do we find the name Mordechai in the Torah? And that is one of the ingredients of the holy anointing oil of the Shemen HaMishcha, which is called Mordror. And it says the Gemara Umetake Minon, and it translated into Aramaic, it is Merodachio. Merodachio sounds like Mordechai. The question is, what's this Gemara all about? Moshe min HaTorah minayim, where is Moshe mentioned in the Torah? Do me a favor, open a Chumash by Yadaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar. I mean, he is mentioned so many times. How can the Gemara ask Moshe min HaTorah minayim? Marshal comes to the rescue. Marshal explains. Marshal says the following: Moshe min HaTorah minayim, Haman min HaTorah minayim, Esther, Mordechai. He says, Sheyesh lohem out shemos acherim. All these people had also other names. For example, Moshe is also called Yekusiel, or Avictor, or Tuvia. And Esther was actually called Hadassah. And Mordechai is also called Bilshon and Psachia. Homon is also called Memuchon. What the Torah is asking is, why are these the names that we use and not other names? Actually, the truth is, all four of these names have something in common. They're all not Hebrew. Moshe, as we saw, is Egyptian. Homon certainly is Agogish, or whatever the language is that the Bnei Amalek spoke. Mordechai and Esther are such clearly Babylonian stroke Persian names. There are even names of idols. Mordechai is the Babylonian idol Marduk, and Esther is the Babylonian goddess Astarte. So why do we call people by these names? I have a very, very good friend in Manchester, and his name is Mordechai. And he would not dream of having a name that is the name of an avodah zorah, of an idol. The truth is, it only seems to be the name of an idol, but when we absorb the name, we kind of kasher it. We say no, just like when Yocheved heard the name Moshe, the Egyptian name that the Egyptian princess gave to her Jewish baby, she said, I hear something else. I hear his future, that he will be the leader of the Jewish people who will rescue them from the waters of the Yam Suf. And when Mordechai and Esther are called Mordechai and Esther in the Megillah, it is because they have these interpretations, these call them midrashic interpretations that the Gemara gives to them. And the same is with Homon. So now we see, whenever we hear the name Moshe, we should realize what the power is of Jewish identity, that it can overcome an Egyptian upbringing, that it can survive 60 years in the desert, that it can be awakened with one burning bush. Seriously, the name Moshe is an Egyptian name. We have absorbed it, we have made it into a name that is mentioned time and time and time again, and it's the name of our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu. And wherever he came from, doesn't matter. The question is where he went to. He was called at the Sneh, and the God of his father, of the Jewish home in which he grew up, was revealed to him. From there on, he never hesitated, never looked back. There was no Ish Mitzri. And the project that started for this young prince in Egypt, when he said, Vayiven kol v'chol, and he looked hither and thither, and he saw, Ki ein ish, that man cannot live like that, Vayaches ha-Mitzri, and he killed the Mitzri. He was successful in killing the Mitzri because he became Moshe Rabbeinu. Wish you good Shabbos.